So we'll start off by just talking about what we're doing, thinking about realist research. We're trying to work out ways practically to do research of complex social issues, thinking about the application and understanding of realism. Ontologically, understanding realism as the real being independent, something that is independent of our knowing it, and epistemologically recognizing that we can develop partial causal accounts of that which is real. That's our practical challenge and engagement with these ideas today. We're going to hang each of our presentations off three key points. Clearly there's many more areas that we can address. I just want to spend a few moments, if I can, just talking through some of these ideas. Realist methods are theory incarnate, which necessarily raises a question: what do we mean by theory? And this is a discussion that happens a great deal within the Ramesses website, discussions, and also has been the context of many methodological discussions in papers and books and so on. For many realists, including I think the three of us, we take a stand that theory is a Miltonian middle range theory. That is a bundle of hypotheses that can be tested empirically in some way, shape or form. A set of theories that are abstract enough to be able to apply to a range of different settings, yet at the same time allow for testing of those ideas in the different settings in which they happen. So that's part of the discussion. Now, that very much draws upon the work of Ray Pawson and Nick Tilley in their book Realistic Evaluation and the discussions. There are other discussions about theory happening, of course, within realist methodology. Most probably, of course, the critical realist accounts of theories as apodeictic, as informing and standing above those testable theories, grand narratives, grand theories accounts around agency and structure, feminism, and in my own work, discussions about germ theory. The point I would just stress about the way that we're thinking and talking about theory at the moment is this idea that they are in some way testable. And that's an important part of what we're interested in developing and working with in discussing realist methods this afternoon. The second area that we're going to keep going back to over the three presentations is that the explanations, the causal explanations, the accounts that we can make from realist research depend upon context. Context is most often characterized, I think, as something about place or about intervention. But we're thinking about context in this situation. We're talking here, I think, about the ability of agents to evaluate, to be reflexive, and through that to be able to, or fail to, do certain kinds of actions at certain times. The route that takes us down, I suggest, is to thinking about the dynamism of context. There's a quote I came across recently, which suggests, which describes well, I think, the issue of context. That no man steps in the same river twice. He is not the same man, and it is not the same river. So the context shapes the possibilities for certain kinds of actions, certain kinds of evaluation to happen. Now, that potentially can lead one down a route into a sort of relativist wormhole. But the third point that I want to bring to your attention is the idea that mechanisms are an important part of any explanation. Those mechanisms suggest are causal in their nature. They are real, and as I suggested when I started, that the real is independent of our knowing it. That some of those mechanisms are available for us to be able to measure directly or indirectly. Other mechanisms we have to make claims to, back to those ideas about theory again, and the importance of theory in this. What I also suggest is that there probably aren't that many mechanisms around in the social world. That mechanisms apply across very wide-ranging and different empirical situations. And this I think starts to differentiate a realist methodology from empirical methods in quite significant ways. In so much as when we are thinking about mechanisms, we are not thinking about things that you can necessarily measure directly. And so, to this quote from Joseph Maxwell in his excellent book on realist qualitative research, where he talks about the way in which concepts, meanings and intentions are in fact as real as rocks for realist researchers. That we lay claim to these, and that these accounts are how we start to develop explanations about that social processes that we're interested to investigate. We may or we may not get it right. But what we're seeking to do is to bring evidence into relationship with those ideas and see if we can get some kind of concordance, while at the same time recognising that because what realism has is a depth of ontology, that the real is independent of our knowing it, that on occasions we simply will not be able to find those mechanisms. We will not be able to measure those mechanisms directly. We can use all sorts of indirect ways of measuring that which we're interested to investigate. Thus, this recourse by Joe to these interesting ideas around quarks, black holes, meteors, dinosaurs, William Shakespeare and all the rest of it. None of which, of course, we have direct evidence for. We used indirect evidence to be able to make all sorts of claims about these particular phenomena. So if I take those three ideas that I started with, the realist methods are about theory incarnate, and how that folds into our understanding of the way in which explanation happens, in which theory and our understanding of evidence are brought into some kind of relationship with other, and mechanisms allow us to be able to lay claims to the causal, the generative processes that are at play. I'll try now to do some work just to make the to develop a method, an approach to what we're interested to investigate. First of all, just drawing on something from Jeff, a logic of analysis is in which we are interested in context and mechanism and outcome. Those three elements that were in my description. And the question that we're seeking to ask in realist research is not simply what works, but what works for whom, in what circumstances, and why, and when, and how. Yep. So we're actually bringing into play accounts of and explanations of causality in the way in which we build an account. And this drawing on Ray Pawson and Nick Tilley's work is a heuristic device, the CMO, the context mechanism picture, which attempts to, in some way, represent what we need in the explanation. And what I want to stress about this is that this is a picture which is a heuristic device which helps people to understand what it is that is needed within a realist explanation. What quite often people, and I've done this myself in my research, it seeks to do is say, that's the mechanism, that's the outcome, that's the context. In fact, what happens is that they intertwine with each other. That the mechanism can't happen without the context, it can't fire without the context being there, that the outcome is a result of that context and mechanism, that the regularity is shaped and pushed and pulled in all sorts of directions. Of course, there are far more than one mechanism at play in any one situation that brings about a particular outcome. And what we might also think about in the context of this are, these are ideas again drawn from Ray Pawson and Nick Tilley's work, are that we have, as I mentioned earlier on, there's the ability to be able to evaluate, to be able to identify particular courses of action to be taken in a particular circumstance, and to do that available to us resources to be able to do that, to be able to shape those regularities and also reasoning. To draw upon that, the point about the mechanisms being transferable, I just want to have a look for a few moments at the basis for transferable lessons. I suggest to you that in any given situation, the context is going to be different, the mechanisms might be the same, the outcome might be different. All sorts of different combinations of context, outcome and measure might be happening in particular situations. I want to stress here is the point that I made earlier on, that what we're interested in here is not some set of data points, some empirical account of what's happening, but rather to be able to lay claims to particular mechanisms happening in particular circumstances, in particular sorts of ways, to leading to particular sorts of outcomes, to therefore be able to explain the processes that are at play. And so, with that foundation in mind, I just want to spend a few moments thinking about the way in which realist research proceeds, and hopefully through that to just clarify some of the points that I've been making. This is a quote from Imre Lakatos, who was spending time thinking about the way in which Eulerian geometry had developed, and he talks about a zigzag path in which there's this movement between examples and counterexamples, premises, conjecture, at each turn shaping our understanding of a particular problem. So naive conjecture leads to counterexample, doesn't lead to a fully fledged account of the structure that they're interested in. That process of discovery, which can't be discerned in the final product, in the final equation of the Eulerian geometry in this case, arises from a zigzag movement between evidence and ideas. Back to evidence, back to ideas. That's the point that Lakatos is making here. And so, this is my final slide, which tries to bring all the ideas that I've been talking about together. The first is to recognise that what we're after investigating in this in realist research are theories. We have theories about that which we are interested to investigate. So that realist research is theory driven. And the first part of any piece of realist research is the investigation, the looking for particular fallible, fragile theories that will become the basis of the investigation. They drive forward the decisions in the investigation about what methods to use, what samples to use in the research. There's a middle range, testable bundle of hypotheses that are available to produce a set of fragile ideas about what works for whom, in what circumstances and why. The value of those theories, as I mentioned, is that they provide the insights that we require to decide what methods we're going to use to investigate that which we're interested to investigate, and the cases that we will purposefully choose to do that investigation with. And those cases are brought into relationship with evidence. The theory is brought into relationship with evidence in those cases, using those methods, which is used to test and judge and refine the ideas. It's that recognition that what we start off with are fragile ideas in the research, and those ideas are then used to creatively recontextualize the evidence that we've got available to us. So that all the time we are refining the theories that we have available to us in relation to evidence, and bringing the causal accounts into play through a process of abduction, bringing object, sign, and signifier, interpretant, into relation with each other, evidence and ideas, but also a process of retroduction, making claims to causal accounts of what is. That zigzag process happens through the research, and we do as many zigs and as many zags as we can possibly do as I started off by saying that what we recognise realism to be, or the real to be, is something that is independent of our knowing. We're constantly going to be refining and developing. We're always going to have a fallible model at any stage in the research, which will always be available, will always be developed further. And so the question of when a piece of realist research finishes is not a very difficult question to answer. And actually, one that we, I suspect, all recognise is that when the grant finishes, or the PhD funding finishes, and you've got to hand in, that's the point that you've got to in that particular piece of research. Which means that then you can take it up and start again. You're back to the beginning of your zig, if you will. You're searching for evidence, surfacing ideas, garnering, outing theories that are available then to further knowledge. The science, in a realist sense, is very much an account of how one identifies theories and seeks to improve upon those theories. And so the process carries on. And that is a heuristic. All of you, I know, will recognise that such a heuristic doesn't exist in the real world, that research is an incredibly messy process, and you can't pare it down to these beautiful, neat zigzags. It's a schematic account of what's happening in a research process. Now I'm going to hand over to Jeff, and Jeff will present a nicely messy bit of research. I hope hangs on to what I've been talking about.
Right.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. So, we need to swap wax.